Hey everyone, my name is Hunter Page. I am a professional landscape photographer based in southern Utah. And this is an image I call A Day Once More. This is a video tutorial from start to finish on how I created this image. An overview, we will cover selective color adjustments to grabbing your highlights in Photoshop. This is all going to be done in Photoshop and Camera Raw, but grabbing your highlights and your shadows and making specific and refined adjustments to those specific areas for overall better clarity, better color separation, which is something I preach on all of my workshops and tours, and something that I could not recommend you learn about anymore. It will make a large effect on the overall quality of your images. So I hope you guys enjoy this video, and we'll dive right into it. So I have both my images here in Camera Raw. You are able to do this exact same editing technique in Lightroom before we pull this into Photoshop. So feel free to do this in Lightroom. These two softwares are essentially the exact same thing. So everything you see here will be translated into Lightroom as well. So just getting into it, we have both of our images. There's just a couple things I want to do with both of these images selected. So you can just click and Alt click or Command click to select both of those. And as you scroll down to the bottom, I just want to make sure that nothing, like no denoise is added or sharpening. So just make sure those are zeroed out. You can leave chromatic aberration on, and this is up to you if you want to be using the profile corrections. I typically am not a huge fan because it warps the images a little bit more than I like. But from here, we're just going to select one image at a time. I have two images here, one for the sky and one for the foreground. You can see that this image is brighter than this image. So I'm going to be using this mostly for the foreground elements, the landscape, and I will be using this for the sky portion of the image. And this is an extremely easy process to blend these two, and I will show you just how easy it really is. To begin, again, this is the landscape image, so I'm just going to do a couple tweaks on this before pulling it into Photoshop. I want to bring forth more of like the natural contrast of this landscape here and just make it blend with this image nicely. So you need to adjust this image to match the sky of this image essentially to make it look very natural. So I'm going to come over here, and before I even do any of the color balance, which is something you typically do first, I'm going to come down to the curves and just bring down around like the darks and shadow area to add some natural contrast back into this image. So out here looks good. You can see that the highlights in the landscape are starting to come out a bit more, which is exactly what I am going for. And then we can come back up. I'm going to grab the whites, and I'm not worried about the sky really at all here because this is only the landscape image. So I'm going to add a little bit more highlights into this landscape, maybe a little bit of the highlights as well. So a little bit of whites, a little bit of highlights, and then we'll come down to the white balance. It's always worth just playing around with your white balance and just seeing what looks natural and what looks good and the feeling you want to bring forth in your image. This is where that's really going to be done, is here in the color balance. For me, I like a fairly neutral color balance, maybe a little bit on the warmer side for this particular image. So about 5500 for there. And then the tint and magenta, I'm going to push this a little bit toward magenta to further enhance the warm tones to kind of match the color of the sky shining down into this landscape. I oftentimes like to actually take away some clarity in the landscape or the sky. Obviously, it depends on the image, but for this particular scenario, like we could just take away a little bit of clarity, add just a tiny bit of softness to this landscape, which we will be adding sharpening later. Dehaze, not a bad idea to add a little bit of dehaze here. And that's looking pretty good to me. So that's going to be it for this particular image. So this is before and after the adjustments I just made. Now we're going to grab the sky image, and this is where you can kind of have some more fun with it. I want to bring forth like these really nice colors that are happening in here. Like this red, yellow, orange hue was shining across the Henry Mountains over here. It's kind of hard to see, but it is back in here, and I'm going to bring that to life. Again, this is only affecting the sky, so I'm going to add some warmer tones, and I'm going to add some magentas to add some kind of pink purple back into that sky. Again, not worried about the landscape at all. So yeah, that sky's already looking so much better. So before and after of the sky, before, after, looking pretty good. This is where the clarity kind of comes in handy. You can take away some clarity and soften all of the kind of hard edges of the clouds. And I want to give like an ethereal, like really glowing effect here. So if you take away some clarity, that's only going to enhance that kind of feeling you want to lend. And maybe just a little bit of the haze. So this is already looking quite nice. One thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add an adjustment, a linear gradient tool, and I'm going to pull it down so the top isn't so bright up here, so the eye isn't getting stuck up in the sky. So easy to do. Come over here to the selection tool, come down to linear gradient, and I would add just like some exposure to this just so you can actually see where this tool is being applied to, and pull it down something like this, and then you can adjust the exposure afterward. So for me, about here's looking quite nice. So pull down the exposure, a little bit of the highlights pull down, and that's looking pretty dang good. About all I want to do for the sky image. So we have now processed both of these images, one for the landscape, one for the sky, and now looking at this image, I want to add a little bit more magenta tones into this landscape to match that sky a bit more. Okay, so Command or Alt click, and we're going to open objects, and this will pull us into Photoshop to begin the true editing portion of this video. So you can see both images are up here. All you got to do is come down to this base image, right click, duplicate, and select the file on top. So when you do this and click OK, you can come up to this tab, select that, and you can see both of your images are here stacked on top of one another. And you can just take that one out if you want. Okay, so now we have our sky image and the landscape image. What we're going to do is drop this sky into this landscape. The issue with using a sky tool in this situation is that because the line is so soft in here and the kind of like soft haze of light kind of being pushed through this landscape over here, it's not, using the sky tool is not going to do a good job. It's going to be very rigid, and you do not want that. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to black out this layer here. So what you can do is start or option click mask tool. Sorry about that. Right here. So now you can see there's a black mask over this image. So you cannot see the sky image. What we're going to do is we're going to grab a gradient tool. You can just click G or select it here Click this first one up here, and we are going to drag in our sky using a white paintbrush. So you can see as you pull it in, you can see that sky is coming into fruition. And this is not looking so great yet, so I'm going to grab the top, pull this down, and you can see that coming to life a lot more. And it's okay if you overlap onto this landscape a little bit. You just don't want to affect your main highlights over in here, and especially down in the foreground. So about here, seeing where this selection is, and that looks pretty dang good to me. If you come into a situation such as this one where you may want to get a little bit more specific, you can just click B and grab your paintbrush, and you can paint in an area where you really want the sky adjustment to be in the image. So for instance, the sky over here, I want that orange and purple hues back into it, so I'm just gonna paint that back in. So just click and drag it across the image a little bit here, and again, it's okay if it's on the landscape just a little bit, at least it's not going to make a difference. It's always worth just playing around with and seeing how this is affecting the landscape. And I liked how that was looking for the most part, but it was a little too strong, so I'm going to take the opacity down and just kind of click, shift, click, just to paint this in quickly. All right, so without, with, super easy, really, really easy, and it just totally transforms the image entirely. So it's starting to come together already. So now we're moving into like the first real part of this editing session. First thing I will do in this situation is I'm actually going to paint in this hue, this color here, back into this rock. Like you can see a little bit of that hue hitting here, right up in here. And I just want to paint that color back into this rock a bit more, so it more matches this rock here. So the way I like to do this is a little bit more advanced than probably the average person, but it is a very nice feathered approach of painting this in. And I'm going to show you exactly how to do that. So this is your channels column here. If you were to click Command onto this RGB panel, this is going to pull up a highlights selection. So all of this marching ants is selecting the brighter parts of your image. You can further enhance this if you want, which we'll do later. But for now, this is going to be a good selection. So again, all we did was Command click the RGB, it's grabbing your highlights. And from here, we're going to add a color balance adjustment. And there's a couple things we're going to do into this one spot. So this is just one of them. So I'm going to come down to highlights and only watching over here onto this rock. I just want to match the sky color onto the rock. So I'm going to grab highlights, pull over the red, a little bit of magenta, and some warmer tones, so a little bit of yellow as well. What I'm going to do is create a group. So from here, you Command G, that creates a group, and this one image is going to be selected, or this one layer is going to be included in that group. And before I do anything else, I'm going to come back up here, grab the highlights one, and come and grab a exposure. So this is only going to enhance more of the highlights of the landscape. And this will all make sense here in a little bit. So I'm just going to add a little bit of exposure. Close that down. And so now, just as we did with this image, I'm going to black out this group with a black mask. So Start or Command Option click this mask right here, and I am going to paint in on this rock the adjustments that we just made. So take that up to 100, usually flow around 20 or so, and here we go. So painting this in, and might take up the flow a bit for a quicker process here. Okay, it's looking pretty good. And you can kind of see that it's not super harsh, but there is like a line of where this adjustment is kind of creeping down onto the shadowed side of this rock. So oftentimes it's nice to create just like a manual gradient over that paint, over that selection. So I just went to 25% opacity down to 21 flow, and I'm just going to do like 1 or 2 strokes underneath that stronger selection I made before. So this is before and this is after. The nice thing with this is you can just continue to play around with this, and you continue to make it more and more refined. So for instance, if you needed some more exposure, wanted it a little bit brighter, you can easily do that by hopping back in there. So looking at those two, this looks maybe too magenta. So you can come back into this color balance adjustment, take away some magenta, push it more toward green again, and add some warmer tones to help match that a bit more. So yellow, a little bit more red. And then there's one more thing I'm going to do for this rock specifically, which is I'm going to just literally use a paintbrush and paint in part of that rock. So come down here and you can create a layer. And then you can actually, with this paintbrush selected, you can select or click the option, click here on the rock in the most highlight section of the rock. This is going to show up here, like where you have selected. And then I'm going to pull that all the way up here. And then instead of leaving this in normal, I am going to select overlay. It makes it strong selection is basically all that does. And when you're using this, you want a low opacity. You do not want 25%. You want like 10 to 15%. So coming down to 10%, you can see where these highlights already are. So I'm just going to start painting in where those highlights already exist, where that color already naturally exists. And I may do like 3 or 4 passes in an area. Might do like a big paintbrush and then a thin paintbrush to make it just appear more natural. Just bringing this back to life. All right, that's looking pretty good. Okay, and I will call this good for now. Let's see. Okay. So that's looking pretty nice. Starting to match the highlights over here a bit more. So this is before that paintbrush and after. And if you don't like how strong you do this, it's nice because you can always just take down the opacity and decide where you want that. So maybe about 80% is going to be a better adjustment for that. Okay, from here, just a couple more things with color before we get into like the overall exposure and whatnot, because I want to. The reason I'm painting first before I do all of the exposure adjustments and levels adjustments is I want this color to be here initially, and I want like the more subtle highlights to be here initially before using the levels and curves and all of that. So it is selecting this adjustment as well as this cliff over here. They're both being selected. Otherwise, this is gonna not be selected because it's falling more into the shadow area. You can see this is before the two adjustments we've made, and this is after. So it's gonna select these, or more likely to select these. Okay. One other thing, and there's a couple ways of going about this. I'm just going to do it kind of the more easy way. So I'm going to select another layer here, just a blank layer here, and going to come up over here, select the B for the paintbrush, and option, and click into the sky over here. So you can see this is the color that it gave us. I want more of the kind of pink purple hue that was going on. So I'm gonna manually select that color up here. And this time we are leaving this on the normal option. Take this up a bit, leave the opacity around 10, and I'm just going to click and drag across this landscape here, kind of in the sky, and very feathered. It's coming down onto the landscape. So I'm gonna just go do 2 full passes, 2 main kind of clicks, and that's looking good for the kind of like magenta hue that's going on. And then I'm gonna actually grab the warmer tones, so the like the orange and yellows, and I'm gonna do a pass as well into this. And you can see that it's actually grabbing some of the rock feature here, and that is totally fine. This is only going to enhance the overall fill. And what I'm going for here is this like light spill into the landscape to enhance where the light source is coming from. So about there, looks pretty dang good. You can already tell that like ethereal kind of fill is already coming to life. So you can see it kind of abruptly ends right here, kind of directly centered, and we will want to fix that. So let's kind of zoom in over here, and at a lower opacity, maybe 8, take the flow down maybe a little bit. I'm going to click and drag here where this one ended and pull it over into this area of the image. So select and pull. And then add a little bit more of those kind of purple magentas into this. And I want to give that light, kind of light streak pulling in front of the Henry Mountain. So I'm going to grab a smaller paintbrush and utilize that. Maybe grab a more colorful paint. And all right. Not looking too shabby. All right. Might take down the opacity a bit, and that is looking pretty good to me. Okay. At this point, we are going to work on the overall exposure of the image and use some more selective tools to grab the highlights of this landscape here. So again, I'm going to come up to the channels, command click, and this is grabbing the highlights one, so it's grabbing just the highlights in the image. What I'm going to do here is select and inverse. So this is going to be selecting everything essentially besides the main highlights. And what you want to do when you have this selected is come over to the channels and just add a mask here, and you can see it created an alpha 1. So if I select this, everything that is white is being selected. So instead of using what would be the shadows one at this point, because we inverted the highlights, I want to create a shadows 2. So I want to be more refined. And the reason I'm doing this is I want to grab more of the midtones. So what you want to do is Alt, Start, Shift, or what would that be? Command, Option, Shift. And you can see they got more refined down into this landscape here. That's pushing away from those deepest highlights. So at this point, I'm going to grab a levels. And this is a beautiful tool. You can grab this levels and start pulling it to the left, bringing up the midtones, like the subtle highlights that are in here. And you can see this is a global adjustment, and I don't like how that brightness fills this entire image. So what you want to do is grab this middle one and pull it to the right to add a contrast back into this adjustment. And this is going to make the highlights, the subtle highlights in here, appear brighter with more contrast. Maybe a little bit more, about 87. And that's looking pretty good to me. All right. Something else you can do is, if you don't like the whole global adjustment that is happening, you can always put this into a group and just have it select the landscape here. For now, I'm going to come back up here, select the RGB, just the Alt Command click. And I'm going to grab the exposure here and just bump it up just a little bit. And the reason I'm doing this is I'm going to paint this selection only into the landscape here. So what you want to do when you have this selected like this is you want to put this into a group as we did before. So Alt or Command click G, puts it into a group, and then come down to this mask button here and make sure that's selected, and do Start or Option click, and that creates a black mask on this. Make sure your paintbrush is selected and bring your opacity back to 100, and then just paint in where you want that selection to be. So if you want it here in the rocks, you can add that there. Definitely over here in like the further highlights of this image. And you can't really see a huge adjustment that is happening currently, but you can always adjust that. So if that was enough, maybe take this up to about 50. You can see those highlights coming back in. Yeah, that's looking quite nice. And yep, just paint it pretty much wherever you want. I recommend you do that on, again, where the subtle highlights are, just to make them appear brighter. Add more separation between your highlights and your shadows. From here, I love color separation. Color separation is everything. If you have your highlights over in here, if all of this is kind of fading into the blue hues of the shadows, it's not going to look right. It's not going to look good. You want the highlights to be warmer than the shadows. The sun is hitting it, the sun is warm tone, the shadows are not. So I'm going to do an adjustment here. So while I'm in this group, I'm going to grab a color balance tool, come down to the highlights, and we're just going to add a little bit of warm tones onto that adjustment. And you can see if I crank this, this is where we've painted in. So I'm just going to add a little bit of warm tones to this, just enhancing that light. Yeah, that's looking pretty good. And I'm going to come back to this and just make sure this rock over here is painted in enough. There we go. And if that's too much, which I think it is, just grab your opacity and bring it down a bit before you start painting. And then just paint it on in. Awesome. So this is the very beginning, before and after. Before and after. Looking just so much better. It's a completely different image at this point. So just a couple more things that I want to do here. The overall brightness of this immediate foreground, I'm not a big fan of. And I want to pull the eye away from this immediate foreground here and bring it back into this area here where you have this natural framing element, this big U shape, which is only being enhanced by what I would call is a circle. This is creating a circle, and it's creating a natural flow for the eyes to travel through the image with no disruptions. The only disruptions I see is this foreground here taking up a part of the image that it's properly composed, but there's like some detail in here that doesn't necessarily need to be shown to the viewer. So we're going to fix that, and we can easily do that. Oop. Let's just grab an exposure, or let's do a curves, adds better contrast. Just grab somewhere in the middle, pull it down, and we are going to add a black mask on top of this. So in this situation, just click the X to make sure this black box is here. So delete that and click the start or option and select that mask. So now that selection is hidden behind this black mask, and we're going to essentially paint this in. So for time purposes, I like to add a linear gradient tool, and I'm just going to pull this up, and I don't want it to go beyond this immediate landscape here. So that looks pretty good. Pulling the eye away from the edges of the frame. Going to grab a paintbrush, and I'm just going to add this in manually into some other areas of the frame here. Make sure you have the white paintbrush selected. And you can get pretty crazy with this. You can add as much as you want. You can add like nice gradient adjustments essentially that is going to pull, from left to right, and you can get as crazy as you want with it. But for time purposes, I'm going to call this pretty much good. There's going to be one other thing. Just grab a exposure, bring that down a little bit. Basically just doing the exact same thing here. So grab the black paintbrush and start or option click to create that black mask. And I'm just going to grab the corners of this image. Just paint in that so the eye is not drawn into this section at all. Yes, much, much better. I'm going to add a color balance selection. specifically for the highlights, and then a color balance selection specifically for the shadows of the image. And then we will end it with a hue or saturation selection on this landscape. So what we want to do, come up to the RGB channels here, command click, and select color balance. So now we have a color balance. We can do high color, saying that it is the highlights of the color balance. And then we are going to do the opposite. So we can command click and select inverse. So now we are selecting more of the shadows. And to make a more refined version of this selection we just made, we need to select a mask here. And from here, you want to Command, Option, Shift, and click Data Alpha 2 channel. So that's one time and one more time. So now it is only selecting the shadows of the image. And then select your color balance. So now we have a shadow color and a highlights color balance. So you can double click this. And you want to leave the shadowed color balance adjustment without the preserve luminosity, and you want to keep it in midtones here. And you're going to add some cool tones back into that area of the image. So instead of going to the red, we're going to go to cyan a little bit, maybe a little bit toward green if it is needed. I don't think it is here. I'm just going to leave that at 0, and then add some cool tones, blue, into the landscape a little bit. Yeah, that looks really nice. And then come over to the highlights. I'm going to come up and grab the highlight selection here. This is up to you if you want to use this. If you click it, it makes a stronger adjustment right off the bat, and it's more kind of selected onto these highlights. Or you can do this and it's more of like a feathered approach. I typically leave this off because I'm usually not pushing the highlights too far. So add a little bit of warm tones, some red, some yellow, about 10, a little bit of magenta, kind of match that sky a bit more in those highlights. And these should be subtle adjustments. They should not be just crazy adjustments where like the blue is so blue and the warm is so warm. Like they should be subtle and they should look natural and they should look really good. So this is before those adjustments that we just made. So before and after. Before, after. And as I go through that, I realize that I could add a bit more warm tones into this image. Yeah, there we go. Pretty much the last thing is this blue is too blue. It doesn't look too good. Like these are the blue lands as they've been locally known for a very long time. But it's a little too blue for me. So last thing is we're going to grab our colors and do some color adjustments here. So select the landscape. Of course, it is in the blues. And I'm going to desaturate the blues a bit. And then I always like to just play with the hue slider and just see how it makes the landscape appear, makes those blues appear. And whether I use it or not, that is okay. I'm just going to leave it at 0. So the only issue with these global adjustments is that, again, it is grabbing everything in the entire image. Anything that is blue, it is grabbing. And I do not want that. I just want this immediate kind of middle ground to be selected. So I'm going to go -16, and then I'm going to black out this mask. So make sure that black is selected. Option click or Option Delete. Forgot about this earlier. This is a quicker and easier way of doing it, which is make the black box appear, which is by clicking X, you can make that appear. And then Start or Option and backspace or delete, and that makes that black mask appear. And B, and then just paint in where you want to take away those blues. And yeah, there we go. Better. You can play with this a bit, you know, grab the tones in here, the hue, and either add some saturation, push the orange more toward red or more toward yellow to give some better color harmony. I like the kind of orange hue that it's at because it matches the rest of the highlights and it matches the sky over here. So I believe that gives better color harmony. So I'm not going to mess with that. One thing is I like to add just a tiny bit of life back to this one singular bush here. There's not a lot of plant life in this Manco shell formation. So I'm just going to select the color here, add some saturation, add a little bit of lightness to it. And again, make sure the black box is selected and black that mask out. And then I'm just going to paint in that little bush. All right. From here, I'm going to stamp this layer. I'm going to basically solidify more or less the adjustments we have made and do just a couple more things. So what you want to do here is Command Option Shift and click E, the E button. From here, there's a few things I don't like. So right in here, this little bush kind of creeping into the frame, not a big fan of. Also don't like how this twig is creating an X. That's very eye-catching. Doesn't look good. So I'm going to fix those. And then you always want to check the sky if there's any, like if your sensor is dirty and it creates little black dots. You just want to go through here and make sure that you don't see any, which I don't. So you can come up here and grab the stamp tool or clone tool. Come down in here. And the way I like to do this, you know, you obviously want this to look as natural as possible. So if you click Option, it says when you click that spot, you're basically dragging that spot and cloning in this exact spot wherever you start to paint this in. So, you know, again, you want to make it natural. Usually it's best if there's not like harsh contrast or very defined lines. So I'm going to grab in here and just kind of paint this in over here. Kind of make it match. And boom, that looks good. Then work with this little thing here. I'm going to select over here. And, oh, you want to make sure you're at 100% opacity. That is good with me. So the editing process is completed. So this is before and after. Before and after. The last thing I do before saving this is I want to sharpen it and save it to the web, or sharpen it for the web. So what I like to do is drag and click, or click and drag this to make a copy, and then duplicate layer and select new. So now you can see These are basically two different images here, more or less. So this adjustments that we are going to do is not going to affect this here. And in fact, once you get to this place where you stamp this, you want to come up and save this. You want to save this as a PSB or a TIFF or whatever however you like to save it. I always save it in this Photoshop format, and make sure that you have these selected so you can come back and edit that. But from this point, we don't need such a large image, so I'm going to come up to image size, and I'm going to take the width of this down to 2400. Click OK. And then I'm going to duplicate that mask again. So just drag it into this layer box here, and then make your mode down into the luminosity. And we're going to add some sharpening. So I like to do filter, sharpen, and smart sharpen. This is my preferred method. I'm gonna keep this amount at 100, take the radius at about 2, and you don't want this to look over sharpened, especially for the web. It's gonna look funky. So just do a little bit, come down to 1.5. For the shadows, you can add a little fade into the shadows, because of course there's less sharpening in the shadow details than there are in the highlights. So use a little bit of fade in there. And as you click this and hold it, that takes away the adjustment. And then as you unclick it, it shows the sharpening you just made. I'm going to call that good there. And then come back into this. So sharpen, smart sharpen. And I'm going to use a very low radius, so about 0.4. And this is basically grabbing more of the smaller details in the image. And I'm going to call that good there. Perfect. And then you can just come up and save a copy as a JPEG. Let's save this as the image title. A Day Once More Web. So it is saved as a web version. And select save in your preferred destination. Well, I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. You can always come back to this and relearn a lot of what I have covered. I know it was a lot of information, but that's the beauty with these videos, is you can just come back and watch it again and again until you get that system dialed and continue on the learning process. I am Hunter Page. Thank you for watching.